Let's get into our next conversation. Please welcome to the stage Senator Brian Schatz. Thanks for being here.
Nice to see you.
You think someone failed to file a permit to turn the heat up in here? Is that? In the Democratic Party, there's always been tension between protecting the environment and energy. So when you think about permitting reform, how do you balance those two priorities?
It's a planetary emergency, so I think the environmental movement over time, look, I got my start in the environmental movement stopping bad projects, save Sandy Beach, save Sunset Beach, and then there was finally a bumper sticker that just said, save something. That was how I made my bones in politics and in the environmental movement. But because this is a planetary emergency, we've got to reconfigure our thinking to the scale of the problem. We need to build big things rather than just be fixated on stopping bad things. Now, the National Environmental Policy Act and other federal and state statutes are important, but to the extent that they're an impediment towards us making our clean energy goals a reality, I think they need to be addressed. So I'm pretty hawkish on permitting reform generally, and I have had some very difficult conversations with my friends on the left about the urgency of the moment. And so we're looking forward to the discussion between the House and the Senate.
Well, that gets to a broader discussion, I think, that's been taking place in the Democratic Party between this idea of abundance versus maybe the billionaire class, and where do you sit on that?
Look, that's like a salon. We got to pass a bill. And in order to pass permitting reform, we're going to need to address, and I've been listening to the conversations, the previous two conversations, there is effectively a ban on solar energy projects. 90% of the projects in the queue are solar. Whatever you think about the climate crisis, wherever you are on the political spectrum, the vast majority of the electricity that is available to get online is solar energy. And anything with a federal nexus, not just on federal land, but where there is a federal nexus, is effectively banned. And so it's nice to kind of configure a statute for a world in which Donald Trump's agencies aren't doing violence to solar and wind projects. The CEO of Bechtel was here saying really compelling things about when the government makes a decision, it has to stick. But there's a national solar ban right now. And so in order to get permitting reform, we need to have some confidence that we're not going to make the world safe for the American Petroleum Institute and not for all these solar projects. And again, I have an abiding interest in solving the planetary crisis, but even if you don't care about that, even if the only thing you care about is the price of an electron, this solar ban is creating an electron shortage across the country, and that's before the ramp up of data centers and an increased load. So we've really got to address this national solar ban before we get into kind of configuring NEPA in a way that makes perfect sense, because the administration has tons and tons of tools to not just revoke permits, which they've done, but also to sandbag permits to the point where time being money, float being not endless, a lot of projects are dying on the vine right now and creating an energy shortage.
So you're not concerned that if permitting reform happens, that it'll end up just speeding fossil fuel projects and sidelining renewables?
I mean, I have that worry. I looked at the SPEED Act. And I want to be fair here. I think there is a good faith effort to try to effectuate permitting reform. But, and I'm not my friend Sheldon Whitehouse's spokesperson or my friend Martin Heinrich's spokesperson, but the two things that I've heard them talk about is A, we got to lift the ban. We got to lift the ban on solar energy and wind energy. And B, there's like nothing on transmission in the SPEED Act, right? And I would say also, if you look at the underlying statutory language in the SPEED Act, right? Everyone wants to pass permitting reform, and this is something I learned when I was a kid at the Hawaii legislature. Sometimes you get so attached to the bill that you forget why the bill is important, and by the end of the legislative session, you're just trying to pass something called the original thing. We have to remember that permitting reform is for the purpose of getting more electricity online for the construction, the transmission, and distribution of electrons. And so the SPEED Act does some important things, but it also leaves out the sort of elephant in the room: transmission and the national solar ban. And then underlying that it's not really NEPA reform. It's a pretty big loophole where any state or tribal agency can do their environmental review and then obviate the need for a federal review. Now, do I think that after you've completed your review, that decision by the federal government must stick? Yes. Do I think that any developer of fossil or clean or anything else, housing, deserves an expeditious decision by its government? Yes. Now that's NEPA reform, that's permitting reform. But just allowing NEPA to be waived if a state agency says, we took a look at it, I don't think that's, even if we did transmission, I think there are a lot of people who would have some deep reservations about that.
So transmission lines has got to be one of the wonkiest things, but it's one of those things where, everyone says, yeah, we need more transmission lines. But then when one pops up in their backyard, they get really upset. How do you confront sort of that NIMBY attitude there?
Look, we have to decide this is a national priority. We have to decide we're going to be a country here. We're not going to be 50 individual sovereigns deciding how we're going to run our electricity grid. And I think it's hard. But I think the same problem exists for housing as exists for our electricity transmission and distribution system. We have to decide that there are a couple of things that are important enough that we're gonna distribute the cost among everybody. Everybody is for housing except for in their neighborhood. Everybody is for clean energy except if they can see it. And that's not going to work. If we're going to have a prosperous society that has abundant electrons, we're going to actually have to see the construction of those things. They're not going to all be somewhere else.
Obviously, one of the big users of energy in this sort of energy boom you're talking about is going to be AI data centers. And we're seeing maybe some increasing pushback on data centers throughout the country. How do you feel about this rollout? Does Congress need to step in and do anything?
I'm not sure that Congress needs to step in on the specific question of data centers, and I do think public service commissions, public utility commissions are sort of deciding on a state-by-state and agency-by-agency level. Some of them are asking that whatever increment of new electricity, of new load that is being added to the grid is clean. That sounds good unless all they're doing is crowding out. If they're just capturing projects that were already going to happen, that were wind, and then the rest of the grid is on coal and LNG, that's not really a change in the energy mix. So I think these are tough issues. But I think the main thing we can do is an actually comprehensive permitting reform. And in Sheldon Whitehouse and Martin Heinrich, you have two sort of unreconstructed climate hawks who are also pretty hawkish on permitting reform. So I'm generally bullish on this as long as the House realizes that in order to enact a law, you don't just need an agreement between the interest groups, you need an agreement between the parties and the chambers.
Well, I ask because, in some states, I think in Oregon, for example, right now, there's a project that's causing some consternation locally because there's at least a perception that it could affect water quality. Now, that's an issue that would be reviewed by environmental reviewers of course, through our process. So is there a concern that some of those issues could be ignored if we speed things up too fast? I mean,
yes, the answer is yes, but I also just want to be very clear. I think that we're underestimating the overlap between Republicans and Democrats and between clean energy advocates and those who want a more traditional fuel and electricity mix, because I think everybody is understanding that when the government makes a decision, when the government gives someone permission to move forward, that really has to stick. And to me, the trade is someone who cares deeply about not just climate, but ecosystems and the rest of it, recreation and all the rest of it, is the trade societally should be, we're gonna have these strict environmental standards, but if you get through them, you're in, right? And I think the challenge as the Bechtel CEO was talking about, is an LNG project where not the permits were revoked, but people had multiple bites at the apple in terms of litigation and sort of hanging up a project. That's a legitimate concern. For me, all of this solar, where Doug Burgum and other executive agencies are basically scouring any project with even a kind of ancillary federal nexus and killing it, right? That's also not okay. And so that's where we have to be, is to say when the government makes a choice, especially after environmental review, that review is final. And I think right now, it's a little weird to me that we're here talking about permitting reform and talking about the amount of money and investment and opportunity that will be unlocked, but we are in the middle of a national solar ban instituted by an executive order by the President of the United States. So I'm really hawkish on this in the sense that I did the investment tax credit and the production tax credit in exchange for lifting the oil export ban. I was very involved in the IRA and Joe Manchin's demand for the Mountain Valley Pipeline, which was not a delightful conversation with my environmental friends. And so I am willing to do the hard stuff, but it is really hard to have a negotiation if in the middle of all of it, not all of it, but almost all of the projects that are online that are ready to deliver electrons, mostly cheaper than what is currently being paid for, is being canceled for ideological reasons.
And how much of that is affecting your home state?
The cancellations are not, because there are very few federal nexus in the state of Hawaii, it's really the loss of the IRA credits that are going to hit our consumers.
Big buzzword in this town right now is affordability. How much of this conversation really just needs to center around that?
I mean, I think that's the whole thing. And, you know, because I live in Hawaii and because I represent Hawaii and because everything except health insurance is more expensive in Hawaii, that's what I wake up thinking about every day. And I think inflation and affordability are sort of overlapping concepts, but not exactly the same. I think some people can afford their lives even if inflation is at, you know, X number, and some people feel like they still can't make it even if inflation nominally is better. And so I think thinking about the pain points for individuals, home insurance is spiking, electricity is about double the rate of inflation, you know, food and groceries, some things are cheaper, most things are not. Electronics, as we start to buy our Christmas presents, like everything is up. And I think people want to see us actually working on that.
All right, well, at Axios, we do often like to end our conversations with one fun thing. You went to school at the same school that Barack Obama went to years earlier. Tell us about, do you have any favorite teachers in common?
Oh, I don't know if we have any teachers in common. His buddy who he played ball with was an elementary school teacher of my kids growing up. So, and we were 10 years apart, so I would periodically text the president's sister when the president was in town and say, like, hey, if he needs a 10th for a basketball game or whatever. I didn't get any return phone calls.
No, wait, you're also a body surfer, as I understand, or have done some body surfing in the past.
It's my favorite activity.
Were you doing that instead of studying?
Yes.
Excellent. Brian Schatz, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Appreciate you.